Hi, everyone. Welcome, welcome, welcome. I have to say that 3 times because our usual moderator says that. He always says, welcome, welcome, welcome. That means we really welcome you to our next installment of our conversations on race and policing. Today, we're doing something a little different. We're showing 2 short films as well as having a discussion afterwards. And we do hope that you will have some good questions that will generate good conversation for us. But as always, we have
turn off video. I'll spotlight you. Whatever's happening, I'll mute it.
uh, we have to acknowledge the land on which we reside, and so I will do that in a moment here. Our land acknowledgement. Um, we recognize that California State University San Bernardino sits on the ancestral land of the San Manuel Band of Mission Indians, and that every member of the California State University San Bernardino has benefited and continues to benefit from the use and occupation of this land since the institution's founding in 1965. Consistent with our values of community and diversity, we have a responsibility to acknowledge and make visible the university's relationship to Native peoples. By offering this land acknowledgement, we affirm Indigenous sovereignty and will work to hold California State University San Bernardino more accountable to the needs of American Indian and Indigenous people. And so with that, we are going to now show the 2 short films in a row, and then we'll come back for a discussion on the other side. Thank you. Well, I hope we can all take a collective breath after seeing such trauma. As a matter of fact, I think, just to put this in context, it's almost dangerous for us to show a film or films about individuals, because these individuals existed in a context. They existed in the context of a system of policing, of jurisprudence that all cooperated. There is evidence that the state's attorney general knew what was going on. There had been many, many allegations against, for example, John Burge, that the DA's office knew, the mayor's office knew. Yet this is a great example, I think, of people in authority turning a blind eye so that those people can be kept over there, so those people can be contained. There's an office of, it's called COPA, the Civilian Office of Police Accountability. There's also the Innocence Project. In fact, there are over 100 organizations just in the city of Chicago that are whose goal is to defund the police, to prosecute bad cops, but also hold the system accountable. This is, as you saw with John Burge and Ronald Watts, that this was not a really fast procedure. John Burge, he tortured people for 20 years, and it was an open secret. People heard him. People heard the screams in the station coming from the interrogation room, or they also had a setup down in the basement. I have been following this case for many, many, many years, and especially Burge. Ronald Watts, not so much. He's fairly new, but Burge has been around forever. But I did want to say something about again, putting this in context. I was raised in South Central LA, and there was a very notorious police station not too far from my house. I lived on 98th Street, and this was 77th Street Police Station. And some of you who are from LA, you may have heard of 77th, either yourselves or from your relatives. Uh, this station was shut down a couple of decades ago, but I recall reading in the Los Angeles Times that when they went to, take out all the furniture and stuff, they could see in the basement again. They could see handprints with blood, the prints going down the walls, because of what happened at that station, which is one of the reasons it was closed down. And I think we have to understand that with so much of that stuff going on, with our kids getting stopped all the time, repeatedly getting harassed, this leaves entire communities traumatized, entire communities traumatized. They may not sit around and say, we're crazy because the police are messing with us. But if you look at, I think it's on Showtime, called The Shy. It's about Chicago, and they do cover police brutality, but it just leaves entire communities traumatized. And you could see how it affects, your ability to get into a decent housing, your ability to get a job, because these were hundreds of men, and they're just, as the attorney was saying, they're just the tip of the iceberg. And one of the reasons the Ida B. Wells community was shut down was because there was so much crime, there was so much poverty, and I suspect that the police, had a lot to do with that. Policing is the only profession I've, devoted just about my entire career to examining and deconstructing policing as well as the criminal justice system. And it occurred to me that they are the one profession. There may be others, maybe exceptions, and we can talk about that later, where a young man or a young woman with a high school education, maybe even less, maybe a GED, can leave his community, his lily white community, or his upper middle class community or middle class community, and go into a city like Chicago or Los Angeles or New York and be king of the world. Because when you drive around in that car with all of your stuff on, your dark glasses, your badge, your baton, your extra guns or whatever, you can be the king of the world. And who are your subjects, are the people that you're supposed to serve. You're not supposed to be the king, you're supposed to serve. But that's, sort of the context in which we find modern policing today, is that, these folks have the power to be the judge, jury, and the prosecutor. But speaking of prosecution, after Ronald Watts' trial, the judge said, "We will not tolerate at the Cook County State's Attorney's Office convictions that were ill-gotten by corrupt law enforcement. You won't find a home here." And it's so interesting, if you follow cases throughout the years, corrupt always means stealing or getting involved with drugs, those kinds of things. But I rarely hear officers who beat up the people in the community. They're not called corrupt. They are, just sort of bad cops, but they're not considered corrupt. And Ronald Watts had other officers under his command, and that's why they did the deeds that they did. But John Burge was a former military police investigator in Vietnam, and when he came back from Vietnam, he acted as if he were still in Vietnam. I've heard other officers talk about, many officers from the 1970s were returning from Vietnam, and they didn't feel like there was a difference between patrolling the streets of LA or patrolling the streets of Chicago and what they did in Vietnam. They call it in country. They call it or Indian country. This is the sort of language that they use to imply that these folks are the enemies and we're keeping them away from good white people who tolerate. You know, when people saw George Floyd being brutally killed, um, it was a shock to many people. But I think in the minds of many people, it was always, yeah, well, he did something, he was a bad guy, you know, and it's keeping us safe, blah blah blah. And so, you know, that's sort of the state of modern policing today. You know, Amnesty International got involved with the John Burge um, allegations, and they sent the report to the mayor confirming, and the mayor said no comment whatsoever. In 2003, the governor commuted those 10 death sentences, as you saw in the film. What was not mentioned was that the United Nations Committee Against Torture found that the U.S. government had violated the Torture Convention and called on them to bring the perpetrators to justice. And this is just overall the United Nations Committee Against Torture, and they specifically looked at policing, and they find that, you know, we are a country that tolerates because it is keeping us safe. We presume that it's keeping us safe. Um, I'd like to just, you know, end my comments here by just giving you a few quotes from some of the victims, 3 of John Burge's victims. Anthony Holmes said, after the 3rd torture session, I basically remember being scared to death, and I remember not ever feeling that way before, and I never want to feel that way again, and I wanted to find a way to protect myself from it happening again. I also remember being in the station for a while. I don't know how long. I remember being hungry. I remember being an 18-year-old wanting his mama. I remember not wanting to deal with those detectives who tortured me for those sessions. Ladies and gentlemen, that's the United States of America we're talking about. We're not talking about, you know, and I won't even insult other countries by naming them, you know, because, you know, we tolerate that in this country. Daryl Cannon says, 3 white detectives saying the N-word, you're going to tell me what I want to hear. And when I mumble the words no, one of them would say, blow that N-word heads off. And they pulled the trigger of their shotgun. This is, you know, Russian roulette, I guess. Now the 3rd time they said that, to show you how the human mind works, the 3rd time they did that, the hair on the back of my head stood straight up, as if they had just blown my brains out. But again, faith got me through it. And finally, David Bates says, he tried to kill me. It leaves a gnawing, hurting feeling. I can't ever shake it. I still think I shouldn't have let Burge do that to me, but there was nothing I could do. I keep thinking how I can get out of it, but there was nothing I could do. I remember looking around the room at the other officers, and I thought one of them would say that that was enough, and they never did. So this was never done in secret. This is never done, you know, without other officers, you know, from the captain all the way down to, you know, a desk officer, knowing what was going on at these stations, yet they kept silent. So this is not a case of bad apples. This is a case of the whole barrel being rotten, not just one or 2 people. Finally, what all of these groups are asking Chicago for is education on police torture in public schools, and I think that's happening now, as a matter of fact. They're educating Chicago school children on police torture. They want formal apologies, which has never happened. They want free college for survivors and their families, which has not happened. $5.5 million in compensation for each has not happened. Public memorials for torture survivors and counseling centers for torture survivors. Again, those things have not happened yet. So with that, I will stop now and entertain your questions or comments, or any of the panelists have questions or comments about this. But these are the kinds of things that, you know, we do this week after week, and it is not pleasant. You know, we have to decompress after every session because it is torturous, not in the same way, obviously. It's torturous for us to to find these guests and to research these topics. It's not happy topics, but my students always say that in sociology. Anyway, they say I'm the bearer of bad news always, so I'm accustomed to it. But Stan, did you have a comment about what we just saw? You're on mute.
Back in the 50s, LA had a group of officers called the Goon Squad.
Yeah.
And the Goon Squad would conclude any major crime that happened. If someone got killed by, they didn't care who it was, they would find somebody that would take the rap for it. And so their conviction rate was high because they always found somebody that was going to take the rap for killing or hurting somebody. And one of the problems with these, and if you look at both the videos, you'll see that time was a lengthy time. These people got away with doing what they were doing, and everybody knew what they were doing, but time was is the big factor. You're talking about 27 years. 27 years, that's a long time to have a neighborhood terrorized. And so when you look at that kind of thing, what usually happens that causes big problems, and that was the problem with John Burge, was they turn corrupt. Not only are they beating up people, but they get corrupt in their process. In other words, they want some money. They want something in their pocket for what they're doing. And so somewhere along the line, corruption sneaks in.
Sure.
It's bad enough that they're beating people. Go ahead, Mary.
I was just gonna, sorry for interrupting, but I was just gonna say, is it corruption really, or is it business as usual? I'm not so sure that there are these pockets of officers who do this. I mean, you heard the one quote from the young man who said he was looking around and not one officer spoke up. So I'm of the opinion, Stan, that this is not simply a few bad apples, to go back to that metaphor.
Business as usual.
This is business as usual, and I think we risk certainly the accusation of hating the police. We don't like the police, and it's not that at all. It's just that I love Black people. I love neighborhoods to be left alone. I love people, young men in white neighborhoods can walk down the street and they see a cop and they wave and everything's fine. But our young men in our communities, the west side of San Bernardino, South Central LA, East LA, they cannot walk down the street without the real possibility of being stopped by the police. And once they stop you, for some instinct they have or whatever, no probable cause. Probable cause has just gone out the window. When they stop you, you're subject to, being disappeared. You go into the bowels of those stations and you may never come out. Your family may never see you again. I'm doing lectures right now on what happened to the 4 million African Americans who were freed after enslavement in 1865, and it was slavery by another name, though, because they would stop. African Americans couldn't even stand around on the corner. They would put them in jail, and then they would lease them out to their former owners, in the former plantation owners. And so I think this is just an extension. This has never broken up, really. We have people going in prison now, for working for 7 cents an hour, doing things that companies used to do. But, so it's just a different form, as so many scholars have argued that, it's just been an unbroken line since 1865, or we could say since 1619. So yeah, I think the programs that we've had over the last year or so I think it shows us very clearly that this is more than just an individual problem. This is a systemic problem. These are problems that have to be addressed by systems and not just individuals. And you see, it took 20 some years to get action, but 100 groups had to protest continually before anything happened. And John Burge, by the way, wound up spending only 3 years in prison. He died in 2018, but he only wound up spending 3 years in prison for torturing people, But that's, of course, like they said, the statute of limitations. So they could not prosecute him for the torture, but they did prosecute him for lying. So.
And business as usual, one of the biggest businesses as usual was the FBI. J. Edgar, he ran a covert operation of keeping tabs on everybody, not just little people, but everybody. And his target, talk about business as usual, his target was blacks and gays.
That's right.
And although everyone thinks he was gay himself, he just hated gays to no end. And if he caught you, you disappeared.
Well, I mean, you're absolutely right, and it's not that unusual for the most homophobic people in power to be, hiding who they are. Not always, but certainly hiding their own sexuality. Should we get to some of the questions?
Yeah, I got one from Arso.
Okay, please.
It says, will the blue wall of silence awaken in wakes of new events, or will it stay strong despite calls for police policy change? And personally, it's a hard egg to crack. Business as usual.
Yep.
It's been going on forever and ever and ever. And even when a good cop does a bad thing, no one turns on him. But when a bad cop does a bad thing, no one turns on him. I would like to think that we have some good cops out there that would step over the line and turn the person in. But once you do that, you lose the chance of promotion. You lose the chance of you gain the chance of being shot on the job by a friendly fire. So,
and I've seen that before. Where your calls are not acted on. You're shut out from what Joseph Wambaugh used to call choir practice, where cops go out after work and they drink. So you're cut out from that. You're cut out from the social life of cops if you don't conform. So it's not, again, about the individual. You can be as good a guy as you want to be, but you suffer the consequences. But you can't. How good can you be working in a rotten system? And that's my term. That's not reflective of this panel at all, or this group at all. But I feel like policing has to be wiped away and started all over again. I think police officers should not have to go to, a mentally disturbed person, or they shouldn't have to be in schools, especially when we sacrifice counselors in schools. So, the solution that we have been kicking around for over a year now is to defund, is to start over. Someone asked about the LAPD having gangs. I don't know about the LAPD, but the LA sheriff does. And the sheriff of Los Angeles County has, and this is almost a direct quote, he said, "I'm not going to be having officers take their shirts off so I can examine their tattoos, because these officers all get in gangs at stations and they have tattoos, the Vikings or whatever." And these rumors have been going on since the 1970s. And this is a pivotal decade, because in 1965, as you know, Stan, we had the Watts riots, or the Watts Rebellion in 1965. And I think police, they doubled down. because as most riots in the United States, most black rebellions or riots, it has often 99% of the time been sparked by police action. At 65, two brothers are stopped by LAPD. Their mother comes running out. A crowd starts gathering. Police start calling for backup, and then you have a rebellion. It has often, if not always, been about the police. So I think, in terms of solutions, start all over. Police should live in the neighborhoods that they patrol. They should, and the unions have fought that. We don't want to live because it's too dangerous. Well, you make the neighborhood safe. I know lots of cops who live in the areas that they patrol, and they're the best guys in the area. They're officer friendly, but officers want to travel 100 miles to get out of LA, or they want to travel 70 miles to get out of Chicago. Whereas they don't have a stake in the community. So there's lots that we can do, and after what I've just said, I'll probably never be on a panel for police reform, but I do believe there are some real practical things that we can do. Are there other questions?
Yeah, there is. Corey, I find it interesting that most of the people who voted yes on, I just lost it.
Oh, here it is.
I
found it.
I find it interesting that because of all the, anyway, the blacks voted highly on Prop 8 in 2000, and they were wanting to know that they thought that was interesting that blacks voted yes. And I tell you why. Blacks have a strong religious base.
Can you tell us what Proposition 8 was, Stan?
I think it was against gay marriage. I'm not
gay
sure.
Gay marriage, right.
It's gay marriage.
Yeah.
And I just want to say that in the black community, the church is a powerful tool. And so when the blacks vote, they sometimes vote to the way the church tells them to vote. And I think that was an issue and at that time in our community. And I don't think it was right that they voted that way, but you're right. They did vote strongly against gay marriage. And again, and it could have been also that gays were considered partners. What do you call it? They became partners.
Domestic partners.
Domestic partners, yes. And so all the benefits of a husband and wife were given to domestic partnership, and I think that was one part of it too.
Well, I've often heard this. This is a little bit off topic. This is not about necessarily police officers, but we did mention the GLBTQ issues. I've heard this often that black folks are more homophobic than other folks. That's not true. That's absolutely the studies show time and time and time again. We've had choir directors that everybody just embraced, who were as gay as the day is long, and are accepted in church. We have had people in our neighborhoods. When I grew up, there was a woman by the name of Miss Bird. She wore khakis, a t-shirt, and she had a cigarette always behind her ear. And Miss Bird was, she was loved by the entire community. And looking back on it, everybody knew she was gay. So this idea that black folks are being blamed for Proposition 8 almost not passing is just a red herring. I think we are as tolerant or more, and I hate to use that word tolerant, but we are not as homophobic as the world would like to make us be. We're a community that loves everyone, and judge people on what they do and not who they are. And that has been my experience. That has been my experience in my research as well as in my own life. Other questions?
Yes, Ruth writes, I heard there are gangs within the LAPD and that they have have to carry out certain acts involving citizens in order to join the gang. I heard this from protesters in a podcast. And I'm going to say this. What they found is they found a group of men in the LAPD that had the same tattoo. And they looked at the tattoos and looked at the person's history, and they found out indeed it seemed to be a gang. And they indeed were doing bad things. And so they started looking for more, and they found out there was a large number of these individuals, and they actually called them out. And I don't know if they dispersed other individuals or chastised individuals. I don't know if there's any punishment going on, but you're right. And I believe there's gangs in every department. I believe there's white supremacists in southern departments. And here's the thing, we as people have to live with that. And like Mary says, she calls it business as usual. And I think it's sad that when a Black parent has a 13-year-old son, that they have to sit down and tell him, if you get pulled over by the policeman, this is what you need to do. This is how you need to act. This is what you need to say. They have to go through a whole education for that young man in order for him not to come home dead. And it's a sad state of affairs when that happens. And it is because of these gangs in places where they should not be. They shouldn't be in the police station.
Well, there's constantly articles in the, I read the Los Angeles Times, and constantly they're talking about deputy gangs. That's LA sheriff. And that they're, instead of the sheriff doing anything about it, these gangs are growing now. There's practically gangs at every station. And these are, and I don't think you have to go down south to find white supremacist gangs. I think that's sort of the motive for all of these gangs is white supremacy, and it's not just whites, but it's Latino officers who are also involved in these gangs, you know, and they all uphold, and this is the point I wanted to make about Ronald Watts. People say, well, that can't be racist because he's Black, right? But you don't have to be a person of color to support white supremacy. You know, he's not going to go to a neighborhood, a nice middle-class neighborhood in Chicago and do what he did in those Ida B. Wells projects. You know, he's practicing white supremacy. He is going and arresting and framing Black people. And he's doing it in the name of the state. And the state backs him. You know, the white supremacist state backs him. So it's not just a matter of, well, you know, let's hire more Black people to get into policing. You've got to change the rules of policing. You cannot just, just replace white officers with Black officers, because I'm not sure, you know, the Washington, D.C. Police Department is majority Black, and they have many problems too. And they're a majority patrolling majority Black neighborhoods. They have problems too. So let's just disabuse ourselves of the notion that it's only white people who practice white supremacy. It is a lot of us. You know, it's like James Baldwin said, you know, you can't tell a Negro by the color of his skin. You know, we sometimes, we act on behalf of our enslavers.
Yeah, we have a saying, skin don't make you kin.
Nope, skin ain't kin.
And so there's another, Corey goes on and she says that there's not only Black supremacist gangs in prison, and you're right, there's all kinds of gangs in prison. Sure. One of the things that they're finding out too, and I'll go even further, let's get out of the criminal justice system and go into the military. They're finding gangs in the military. Yep. And that's a sad state of affairs, because I know my father, when he got out of the military, jobs are pretty open for military personnel. And so he came out and he got a job real quick. Well, one of the things that happens in the military is law enforcement has doors wide open for military. Mm-hmm. And so when they come out of the military, if they came out in a gang in the military and 5 of them go to the same police department, they've instantly got a gang.
Yeah.
and then they start recruiting within their department, and we do have issues, and it doesn't. Sometimes the gang isn't racist gang. Sometimes it's a gang for profit. So sometimes let's shake down the drug dealers. Let's get rich. You know, there's all kinds of different ways of doing bad things. Let's see.
Yeah, I think, Corey, your point is well taken, that they are not all white supremacist gangs in prison. I think we weren't talking about prison gangs. We were talking about police gangs. Of course, there's the Mexican mafia, there's the Black Brotherhood. I think it just depends on what state you're in, but there are all sorts of prison gangs. But they're prisoners. We as the supposed good guys should not emulate the people that we're trying to stop. It is not on an equal basis. I've heard people say, well, they're killing each other. Why can't we kill them? Because that's illegal. They're doing something illegal, and you are doing something illegal too. And you're supposed to be enforcing the law and not breaking the law. So I think that because there's so much propaganda on television and in movies, making cops, even that Denzel Washington movie, he looked like a hero, even though he was the baddest cop in the place. He was the worst cop in the whole place. He looked like a hero, because he was going through there and he was like strutting his stuff. But we're just going to have to just throw it all out and start over again, because it's very, very difficult to think about continually these kids going to prison for being set up, or my husband used to play golf with a guy who was a white guy, and he said he was telling him a story about his son getting stopped with meth at the Las Vegas airport. He had it strapped around his waist, and so they arrest him. It was a pound of meth, and he goes to the court, and the judge says, "Son, I'm going to put you on probation." This guy is blonde hair, blue eyes, and the judge says, "Son, I'm going to put you on probation because prison is not for people like you." So we know who these prisons are for. They're building them in rural white communities so that the people in white communities can get jobs, but we're filling them with black bodies, with black and brown bodies. So it's a shame. It's a shame what it seems like everyone from the courts to the police to the DAs, the attorney generals, they're all in on it. It's all, it's all corrupt, and it's all pointed at black bodies.
So, a good segue, Mary, because one of the questions is here. It says, what kind of systematic change would address the issue of bad policing?
Right, yeah.
And she asked it of the panel, and I'm gonna let you handle that, because that's right down your alley.
Well, I thank you, Stan. And I'm gonna have to go, as you all heard, or saw my text. I think that when you talk about ending all of this, we have got to, first of all, it comes from the top. I'm not picking on the sheriff's department, but it's in the news so much. The sheriff of Los Angeles County is an elected office. I think that these offices should be appointed. LAPD, on the other hand, is an appointed office. The mayor and a panel appoints the chief of Los Angeles Police Department. So the sheriff got in on popularity, and not necessarily because he was a good guy. So it comes from the top. And then when we hire people, we always ask, the entrance, the psychological test. We ask about, violence, mental stability, and all of that, but we don't ask questions about racism. We don't ask questions about sexism, homophobia. We almost don't care You know, so I think we can change policing overnight if we change the who we hire on, who the head of the police department is, and what the training is. There is very little training on mental health, for example. No training, as a matter of fact. Very little training on de-escalation in police departments. Because, you know, we want you to go out there and hook and book, as they say. So I think there's a lot of stuff. If we have good faith, there's a lot of stuff that we can do to make people's lives safer and better, and, you know, and to have them be happy to live in their community, and not be afraid to walk down the street or go into a Starbucks and wait for your friend, and then have the people at Starbucks call the cops and take you out. You know, I think that we deserve to be safe. We deserve to be safe. And we cannot say that, oh, well, they're all in prison, so they must have done something. And we have seen today the evidence that not everyone who's in prison is guilty. You know, not everyone is guilty. So with that, I think, thank you for your help today, Stan. I think we're going to have to close out because we are, unless the other panelists, Jeremy, Robbie, Finn, any other comments or questions? I think you all are.
Very quick note, Mary, I wanted to add, because Cecilia has a good point about, and Mary, if you need to drop off, we could.
I will. So thank you all very much, and I'll see you next week. Take care.
Thank you, Mary.
Bye-bye.
I just want to say that I don't want to abolish the police department. I want to revamp it. I think it's very important that we understand that policemen shouldn't be going on mental health cases. There should be a team that goes out on mental health cases that and they are trained to de-escalate. And then, like Mary said, when you get on, even if you get on a criminal activity, you need to first de-escalate. That should be the first thing you do. But instead, I know the training of the police force is to let them know you are in charge. Well, that's not necessarily the thing you really want to do all the time. There's sometimes when you don't want to be in charge, you want them to think that they are in charge and de-escalate. So Cecilia, thank you for the question. And I just want you to know that I'm not for abolishing any police department. I am for revamping it so they can do what they're trained to do and not do different jobs that they have no training for, like I said, like mental health responses. Go ahead.
I think, Stan, I do think that, because I've discussed this a little bit with our students about the abolition cause and the defund cause. And I think that using this platform, it's important to draw a line between the two, because defund can have a very broad spectrum of really significantly cutting police budgets, or, you know, nibbling around the edges. And there's sort of big, broad consensus on certain kinds of reform that involve this kind of thing, as you note, Stan, and Cecilia followed up on that as well. We're hoping to do a panel on the tiered response system in the spring, and we're going to bring in some social workers and talk about that other ways that's been done effectively, where social workers, for example, go on mental health calls when there's no threat and when there's no need to, for example, bring in an untrained and armed person, untrained in the sense of dealing with a mental health crisis with a weapon, and whereas there's not really any danger there. So I think, but I think Stan's point about the line between defund and abolish is really important to maintain. Robbie, did you want to jump in as well?
Well, I just wanted to share an experience I actually had on campus. It involved a domestic dispute. I was walking, this was several years ago, I was walking to Parking Structure West. I believe it was on a Friday afternoon. There weren't many people there, and there was a student, two students actually, one of whom looked in distress, and I was pulling out, and the student sort of looked at me, and she had this expression on her face that said, you know, help. And I just sensed that she was in distress. So I, you know, went to the police department, and is coming out as our chief of police. And I said, I think there's a student who needs help. And actually she went to the student, and the male who was with her had a restraining order. So I think that in that situation, if we would have called somebody like a mental health expert or someone who's has experience in domestic disputes, I mean, it might have been too late. So it's a very difficult situation.
Yeah, I'm so sorry. I never was looking in the chat box for questions, and there's a whole bunch of them in there, so I apologize. But Cecilia, you beat me to the punch. I was saying it while you were typing it, so I do think that mental health professionals should go to mental health calls. And then Corey, you said to keep cops on campus. Now, people have different views on that, and my view is the same as yours, and I tell you why. When you deal with campus police, they may know you, they may know what dorm you're in, they know you personally, and they may have a relationship with you. And if you don't have a relationship with the campus police, you should get one. You should go over there and meet them and talk to them and have somebody know you so you know them. And the reason why I say that, when you call a campus officer, you're going to get, I hope, a friend. But when you call 911 and the outside department comes, they are there for one reason and one reason only, and that is to enforce the penal code. They can't give you any slack or tell you just go back to your dorms, get out, stay out of trouble, go back to your dorm. They can't tell you that. They've got to lock you up. They've got to put you in cuffs, and they got to take you away, because whatever you did, they want to enforce that PC code. And so that's my view on it. I know Mary has completely different views on it, and she wants to abolish it. But I think if you have a relationship with your local law enforcement, she says, like, hi, Officer Johnson, how are you today? Not many people have that kind of relationship, but I think on campus, you can build that kind of relationship. And if you have that kind of relationship and you mess up, you have hopefully a friend on campus that you can go to and talk to, as opposed to a PC officer.
And we saw last year also that the potential downfalls of these sort of school patrol officers, for example, dealing with young with children very violently and escalating situations, because again, sort of when you're a hammer, everything looks like a nail, and when you're a hammer, sometimes that's the main thing you're good for. But I think that also that sort of warrior culture that infuses so many police departments is very, very out of place in, for example, an elementary school, and so I think that's a kind of counterpoint, because I think indeed Mary feels strongly about that. We had a panel about it, but I agree that sometimes the danger of calling first calling 911, calling police officers as the first responders coming from off a campus. I can understand your position, Stan, that you would want a familiar face, and one who's invested in the community. But it's a really complex situation. And to David's point about defund, I think it can be the word defund in this context can encapsulate an enormous number of approaches to this, which might mean incremental change or can mean really fundamental change. And I think that defund and also abolish become caricatured in a lot of the national conversations. They become sort of caricatured of sort of total anarchy approaches, and there aren't. I think that's an extreme characterization and a kind of caricature.
I think at this point in time, we should go ahead and close the meeting out. I thank you, all of you, for your involvement and participation today. And I hope, sorry, I'm typing while I'm talking, but I thank you all for your participation and your involvement today. And I look forward to every week that you get more and more involved and spend more time learning, like I'm learning. Every week something new comes up in our talks that are fantastic, and I just appreciate you guys being here every week. I know it's part of your class, but it's important that we have an audience, and it's also important that we share the information that we are sharing. So thank you again for being here, and we look forward to you next week.